Hello, and welcome to this very spooky episode of the Nerds of the North podcast, episode number 26. 26 unbelievably popular episodes of the Nerds of the North podcast. So today, we're going to be doing a bit of a spooky theme, talking about some of our, as we've dubbed the lists, favorite horror movies that we can for sure remember we have actually seen. So, on that same note, as always, I'm host number one, Matt, and joining me today, as always, is host number two,
Eric. Nick.
Where'd you go, Nick? So yeah, I guess we can. Do you want? How do you want to do this? Do we want to go like back and forth, one for one? Do we want to?
Let's start. We'll both start on 5 and then go down the list.
Oh, we are going in order. Okay.
Yeah, because we have to build up suspense because it is a horror podcast this time.
Okay. If we're going in order, give me one moment here.
And I promise I won't eat through this. I didn't need to put that in my mouth.
That's great. We'll pretend we're doing our best Brad Pitt impression eating while on camera. Yeah, okay. Ordered. All right, I'm ready. All right, so I'll let you go first. What's your number 5 pick?
I'm gonna say number 5 coming in hot is Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, which I believe came out in 2004.
All right.
My number 5 of all time. I love this film. It's one of my favorite movies probably I've ever watched. I still remember watching it with you. There's some characters in it that, for whatever reason, have really stuck with me, like CJ, like the mall security.
Yep,
and his CJ. Like ending, I think he ended with like the propane tank exploding and sorry, yeah, but I just love the characters that start off as assholes and become good. I just love that.
Yeah, I remember what is his line in that moment? It fucking figures, and then just
yeah. And there, I remember the guy that was on Modern Family played another asshole in that film, and
Oh yeah, no,
Ty Burrell, I think his name was.
Yeah, shoot, yeah, you're right. He's the dad from Modern Family.
Yeah, and I love the opening of that film. I hear something in the background too.
In my background, or your?
I think so. It's like a. You don't hear that?
Nope, I got nothing.
Interesting. Okay, I guess let's keep going, man. I have no idea where that's coming from. Oh, are you rocking your chair at all?
Am I rocking my chair? No.
Oh, weird. Because now I don't hear it. It's gone. Anyway, moving on. What was I saying? Oh, the opening of that film with like the little girl showing up in their bedroom and just ripping out her husband's, I think, jugular. And then her Sarah Polley's character getting in that vehicle, and then just the destruction that's happening in that suburban neighborhood. And then it goes into like Johnny Cash's When the Man Comes Around, and having like news clips. Oh man, it's so amazing. I love that opening.
I was gonna say, like, the soundtrack of that movie for me is something that has stuck with me for a long time, because I can't listen to any like Johnny Cash without thinking of zombies, like just full stop. Like, I hear that, I think of that song, and then I'm like, nope, Dawn of the Dead. What a fantastic movie that was. Like, yeah, solid choice. Actually, funnily enough, that is on my list. It is not number 5, so we can briefly gloss over when it comes on mine later. But see, this is the problem. We've seen a lot of the same movies, but we'll see where we. So my number 5 that I chose was Paranormal Activity, the original Paranormal Activity. I had a tradition with some friends back in Montana where we would do scary movies during October. And so we'd get a big group of us together and we'd all go watch these movies. And sometimes the movies were like legitimately like pretty decent films. Like, I guess I won't say Paranormal Activity is necessarily a good movie, but in terms of a horror film of the time, was definitely very good at just being downright terrifying, in my opinion. Some of the movies we watched were definitely really trash. They were not very good at all, but that's half the fun of scary movies when you watch them with friends, is just to kind of laugh at the absurdity of it. But like, yeah, Paranormal Activity had that unique flavor of being like those nighttime cameras, just kind of watching bedrooms and things and people moving in ways they shouldn't, noises coming from places where you can't see where they are. Like, I just had the way they filmed that movie is really what ultimately sold it, I think, for a lot of people, and how scary it was. And I know that series has been like beaten to death by the Hollywood stick, just because of how popular the first film was. A better example of this would probably be like the Blair Witch Project, but I haven't seen that movie. So,
Oh, you should see that movie. It's a good one.
so I've heard. And I mean, a lot of people would use that as the example more for that like kind of found footage type movie. But for me, Paranormal Activity was like my first exposure to that. So that's my number 5 pick.
Yeah, this is hard because there's so many horror movies that are just straight up amazing that it's hard to be like, oh man, why isn't Blair Witch Project on my list? Why isn't Scream on my list? Why isn't Nightmare on Elm Street on my list? There's just so many really unique movies that I would love to include on my list. And that's why I'm not making this my definitive list, just because I don't think it ever could be.
Yeah. Movies we can remember we've seen.
Yeah. And I'm just, and a lot of these movies I've actually seen multiple times, the ones I just listed off, but the movies I'm going to list off for, I think the rest of this, I've only ever seen once, except for my top choice. Sure. And really that's the reason why that is because these movies legitimately freak me out a little bit. So,
sure.
And the number 4 that I'm going to go with, which is weird because I've only seen it once. It's been several years ago. It's a pretty popular movie, or at least well known. And it's a movie called It Follows. Have you heard of that one?
No, I haven't actually.
Yeah, it was, I think, I'm going to say from maybe 2015, 2016. And the idea behind this is one of the most interesting horror film ideas I've heard or seen in a long time. So basically what it is, so the movie starts off with a girl, I think she's in high school. No, she is in high school. And she has sex with a guy. Of course, that just happened. And when that happens, she starts getting followed by this creature. It just follows her, and it won't stop following her until it kills her. So basically, she could go to sleep at night. It tries to attack her, and it's always just kind of walking. She can drive across town, and then the creature just like start walking that direction. So she always has to keep moving all the time, else it's gonna find her and strangle her. Jesus. But the idea behind it, so it's a sexually transmitted monster. So the guy, it is like since she had sex with this guy at the beginning, he was being followed by this creature. And so when he had sex with her,
he pawned it off on her.
And then but if she dies, then it will start following him again.
Oh.
And so it's like, it's almost impossible to ever actually get away from the monster. Because like you can go and have sex with someone, but then that person will die and then it'll come after you again.
Sure.
So it's just like trying to find out a way how you could actually ever get out of that situation. But the movie is just amazing. Like in a lot of ways, it's just amazingly set up. Like you'll have a scene with them just talking, but you'll be looking in the background, just waiting, like seeing if anyone is walking towards them. You know, like, and of course they play that up, or they'll just be in a bedroom, and then someone will open the door, and then the creature will just like walk straight into the room and try and strangle the person. It's just a really fascinating film. It has a really great like 80s synth soundtrack, and I would highly recommend it because it is really well done. So
that's fun.
Yeah,
that's actually, I'm definitely going to try and give that a watch. That sounds fascinating.
It's a good film. Like, and it definitely it has a very eerie vibe. It definitely kind of leaves you feeling sort of a little intense afterwards. At least it did for me. So
interesting. Cool. Well, It Follows. Okay, I'm gonna try giving that a follow.
It's not the name for my Instagram account.
Well, my number 4 pick is actually the original Alien movie.
Oh, solid.
Yeah, like because that movie, I didn't see it. I didn't see it until I was in my 20s, but I remember that movie terrifying me as a child because my parents were watching it and they were like, "Oh, do you want to watch this with us?" And they like offered for me to sit in and watch this movie a little bit because it was like a sci-fi thing, right? They didn't think it'd be that scary. Like the moment my little kid brain was just like, nope, I'm fucking out of here, was that original scene where it's just like it's dark with like a pillar of light in the middle of the room, and then it just like the alien kind of like comes from the ceiling and from the darkness. Yep, that was my moment where I was just like, yep, peace, I'm gone, I'm gonna go play fucking Nintendo, and ran out of the room. But the cast of that movie is incredible. Like Sigourney Weaver, of course, being like the main standout. But shoot, what was his name? The man who played the Doctor later in his life.
There's Ian Holm, who I believe played the Hobbit or Bilbo Baggins. He played the android, I think. He was in that film.
John Hurt. There we go, John Hurt. Yeah, like
okay.
Like he's such a fantastic actor, and in that movie, he's just such a baby, like age-wise. And but yeah, like the whole cast of that movie is just so fantastic, and it just has this fantastic vibe of like futuristic, but then still like 80s futuristic. So there's still like knobs and dials and like really kind of crappy looking screens. Yeah. But by all standards at the time, like, you know, they're on a spaceship. It's so realistic, you know. But like the monster design is so good. The way they film all the shots is really awesome. And then it really was like not the first, but maybe one of the most notable instances of just like a super badass bitch in the movie. Like Sigourney Weaver is just out for blood when she's like ready to take this thing down. And it just like really resonates with me now as being one of the best horror movies, horror sci-fi movies especially. But yeah, just there, I could go on about Alien for a long time, but yeah, definitely a fantastic film.
Yeah, I love that. I love the vibe that movie has. Just it's like the darkness and kind of just the craziness of outer space, and almost like the terror of just nature not caring about you. Like it's just an animal that's wanting to feed. That's all it is. And actually, the beginning of that film, which is them landing on that planet and that one guy getting his chest exploded when the little creature runs out of him, it's just the best, one of the best like tension building movies there is. Like it's just excellently done. And the sequel is good too, like Aliens. If you've seen that one, it's really good.
Yeah, Aliens 1 and 2 are both very solid movies. I haven't. Have I seen Alien 3? Maybe I have seen it.
I haven't. I know it was bad. And I know that David Fincher, apparently his director's cut's a lot better, but I saw a bit of Alien 4 and I'm like, this movie's god awful. Like if it's like Alien 3, I don't want nothing to do with it.
The Alien movies have definitely taken a weird turn because then we started getting unnamed, like in association Alien sequels.
What was like they got up to Alien 4. Alien 4, then they started doing Alien versus Predator films, which weren't great. I mean, I kind of have a soft spot for the first one, but Requiem was terrible. And then they just started doing like the Prometheus and Alien. Yeah, I think it's Insurrection, something like that. Yeah, it's Alien.
Yeah, like the titles of the film started getting like more and more removed from the Alien portion of it, and they like kind of snuck in that these were aliens, you know, from the Alien franchise. And like, which I thought was really cool at the time, and I still do. But now they've kind of leaned further into it being actual like the Alien universe. And I feel like it's lost some of its intrigue for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like the idea of the Prometheus prequels, but I mean, I think that in a way, the alien is best left sort of just like an animal trying to survive, but instead of like
Yeah,
this. Oh, it stopped. I can't hear that noise anymore.
that's good.
There, no, it's starting again. Sounds like a clock or something. I don't know what that is.
But
Anyway, agreed. I agree. It's a good move. Good film.
yeah. So my number 4, Alien. What is your number 3, sir?
My number 3, I'm gonna go with a movie called The Witch.
The Witch.
Yeah, it's
I think
this.
I know of this movie.
It came out a few years ago now. It's still a pretty recent movie. It's about this family that basically they're Puritans, and this was like during the early American settlers from Europe.
Sure.
And this group, this family gets banned from their town, and they're very puritanical, and they start basically getting attacked by a witch. I'll say that much. But the movie is excellent. It's another great tension builder. In a way, it's strangely about female empowerment, which is very strange to say. And it has one of the best lines I've ever heard in a film, which is, "Dost thou want to live deliciously?" And I love that line. It's great. It's a great film. If you don't like goats, it's very bloody. It's very great. There's like a few scenes that have just stuck with my mind since I've seen that film, and I would recommend it. I would definitely put on subtitles though, because it's kind of hard to understand. The movie the guy did after this one, I believe, was The Lighthouse, after he did The Witch, which is also a really strange film. And I wouldn't call The Lighthouse a horror film. Nor would I even say I liked it as much as The Witch, but The Witch is a great film. Definitely would recommend.
Interesting. So, is there like a particular reason why they're hard to understand? Do they have like an accent or
The accent? Yep.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, especially the dad. He's really hard to understand, for me anyway. But,
interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Curious. So The Witch. Okay.
Yeah,
like,
it's spelled kind of weird. It's like The Witch is like 2 V's. And I think it's sort of like an old timey way of doing it or something, but it's a good movie.
I'm trying to think of, there's like another like Vin Diesel. Isn't there like, or is he like the witch hunter?
Yeah, no, it's not an action film.
Witch hunter. Because I thought of 2 different movies when you were mentioning that. Was like Vin Diesel and the Witch Hunter, The Last Witch Hunter, which is like totally a ripoff of like Geralt of Rivia, like The Witcher, and then Nick Cage,
The Wicker Man.
The Wicker Man, yeah,
that was a remake of another film that came out in Britain, the UK, like I think during the 60s or 70s, which was also a really strange movie.
Because wasn't that the movie where he did the whole bees thing?
That was Nicolas Cage's version of it. Christopher Lee's version was different, but it also reminds me of a movie called Midsummer, which I don't know if you've seen that, but that's a really screwed up movie as well.
Interesting. Okay. Well, anyway, my random brain aside. So in the swapping out, my third pick was originally going to be the Dawn of the Dead movie. But since we've already discussed this movie at some length, I figured I could find a proper stand-in, that's something that I felt affected me or has been on my mind since I've seen it. Another movie that fits that category very well is actually Pan's Labyrinth. So it is entirely in Spanish, and it's a fascinating movie. And really, it's directed by a guy that I've always really appreciated, Guillermo del Toro, who is like just the king of monsters, right? Like in terms of like modern cinema. Like that dude and his application of practical effects in movies is something I've really appreciated, particularly in such campy movies as like as a Pacific Rim. I love that movie for that reason. Like it's a movie about giant robots fighting giant monsters, which is already enough for me to get hooked. But so many of the shots are done with practical effects. I just think that's so cool. And the same is the true of Pan's Labyrinth. A lot of the monsters are practical, and just it's the journey of this little girl. It's after the Spanish Civil War. I think it takes place, yeah, it's in like 1944, I think. But like this movie just takes you on this like horrifying journey, where this little girl is being subjected to all of these like kind of fairy tale-esque monsters, but it's done in such a way as to be very horrifying. Really, I think the most terrifying monster in the movie is the one with the hands. I'm sure a lot of people have seen the eyeballs and the hands and this whole number. Like, such a truly terrifying movie. I haven't seen it in years, but I did really, really enjoy it. I won't say it haunts me to this day, but it's one of those movies that like I constantly think about when I'm thinking of like Halloween and spooky time. So highly suggest Pan's Labyrinth. I don't know. I don't know if you've seen that movie. Have you seen that movie?
I have, and there's my dog's butt.
Mhm.
That's truly terrifying as well. Yeah, I have. That it is a really freaky movie. I actually haven't watched it in a long time. I struggled to get through that one, not because it wasn't great. It's just that scene where the guy gets his mouth sliced open. It just really bugged me. Like I just did not like it, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to watch this movie again because that's really gross. Even though it's really. I mean, you're right. The practical effects in that movie are astounding.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I on a similar note of just like really like movies or moments that like really bug you. I know I've discussed with you about wanting to do a potential like let's play on this with Dead Space when that gets remastered. Unfortunately, that remaster doesn't come out until like sometime next year, but there's a whole scene where you have to like guide a needle into the eye of the protagonist. He's like doing some sort of medical procedure, and you have to like guide a needle in, and if you fuck it up, they just get this grotesque like scene of like the needle just like plunging into his eyeball and murdering him. So like as soon as you brought up like the guy getting his mouth sliced open, I was just like, yep, that, yeah, uncomfortable like horror movie moment that immediately came to my mind. So
Yeah.
but yeah, so Pan's Labyrinth, that is my number 3 pick. What is your number 2 pick, sir?
Yeah. I guess speaking of movies that make me extremely uncomfortable and I'll probably not watch it ever again, but I also felt it was just a masterclass of a movie and probably the best made horror film since The Shining. It was that good, like Stanley Kubrick level good, I thought. And this one just came out a few years ago, and that is Hereditary by Arie Astor.
Okay.
This movie, like I had heard how terrifying it was going into it. I wasn't quite prepared for what I was getting myself into, just with the sheer family drama that movie is, and just the how horrible what happens to that family. And it happens pretty early on in the movie, and you're not really expecting it. And then the rest of the film plays out, and there's just some truly horrific scenes, and it's so well acted. The whole thing is so well acted, and I by the end of it, it's just you cannot believe what's going on. It's just so terrifying, and it also has a pretty crazy ending. Like it just has a crazy ending, and it's a great film. And I don't want to give too much away about it because it is really good, but
Sure.
and the secrets of it are part of the fun of it. So yeah,
No,
that's
I love that.
Hereditary. Yeah.
Hereditary. Yeah, that is definitely a movie I've heard of. I wouldn't say I've actively gone out of my way to like try and watch it, but
It's a
hearing a
strangely
suggestion.
controversial film in that some people really hate it, but other people love it and think it's like one of the best horror movies ever made. I mean, I think most people will say it's one of the best horror films ever made, and I agree with that. But that's also one I don't know if I can watch again. It's that intense.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay, that'd be a fun. I really like watching scary movies. I know that for my household, my wife does not do very well with scary movies, and so um, watching them in the middle of the day is something that she can do because then by the end of the day she's fine. But for me, like watching a horror movie during the middle of the day is like, why bother even?
Yeah.
like if I'm not feeling creepy and gross before I go to bed, then like what's the point? But that being said, so my number two pick is a movie called The Fourth Kind, which I'm sure some people are familiar with.
I actually haven't seen this film. I've been wanting to watch it a long time, but I haven't.
Really, you've never seen? I'm so surprised you've never
I know
seen
because
this.
I'm into aliens and stuff like that. But
No, like it absolutely. Again, this is another one of those found footage type movies. Um, even before Paranormal Activity, and I forget the name of the actress who's in this.
I think it came out after Paranormal Activity.
No, you're totally right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Mila Jovovich.
Okay.
Is the protagonist of the film. She's a doctor, works in a small town. Well, she works in Anchorage, Anchorage, yeah, Anchorage, Alaska. Or no, I'm sorry, Nome, Alaska. It's not Anchorage. So it's like this little town in the middle of nowhere, Alaska, and like there are strange disappearances. People are talking about like recurring dreams involving owls.
Which is totally a Whitley Strieber reference, by the way.
I don't know that. But
yeah. As a guy who likes Coast to Coast AM and paranormal stuff, I almost saw Whitley Strieber. Anyway, I can go into that later, but
but yeah, it's all like based on found footage stuff because a lot of it's based on true events. Clearly the events aren't like necessarily true, but
who's to say?
There is a lot of found footage that like scenes are like shot to shot recreations of with the actors. And it really is just as a movie that gives you that tingle up your spine of something not being like quite right. And really just did a fantastic job of, there's a certain level of scary that like I think aliens present that certain movie monsters don't. Like you'd be terrified of like a werewolf or a vampire for sure. But like aliens have this like level of intelligence that makes them infinitely scarier in that regard, that like they're not just out here to like kill you and maim you. They're there to like probe you and find out what you know or what you are.
Yeah.
And they're willing to do whatever to you because to them you might as well be livestock. Like
I think there's something to it that I think is very modern in the sense that our society has we sort of aged out of like fantasy elements. Like I would imagine back in the 1600s, 1700s, there was still some level of believing in the unknown, like because most of the world was unexplored to the Europeans anyway.
Mhm.
So there's a whole idea behind like post-colonial theory and actually it's not about the Orient, it was about the people that were creating these fantastical worlds in the Orient, but it tells you more about what they thought than what actually was out in the Orient to the Europeans. But I think it's something to do with modern man. We don't believe in fantasy anymore, so what we have to do is kind of expand our horror beyond the fantastical, and aliens, for what it's worth, could still be a thing out there. It's not like out of the realm of possibility that could happen.
That's actually a fantastic like suggestion as to why it's so scary, because yeah, that's 100% true. Like we've more or less eliminated like fantastical type beings or creatures being on Earth in any kind of meaningful way, perhaps maybe minus the ocean floor, because God knows that's scary enough as it is. But yeah, like beyond our periphery of Earth, in the stars, there could be any number of things that are out in the dark that we don't know about, that don't really care for us as humans, or are just curious about what we are, and they don't really care how they find out. So, but But yeah, really fantastic movie. Another like found footage type film that I think is really worth a good or worth
Yeah,
a watch.
I'm kind of noticing a theme, Matt, that you're maybe more of a fan of the found footage than.
I don't know, like I mean, I have a mix of kind of more like fantastical. I've definitely leaned more into the sci-fi. I would say that for sure. I guess like sci-fi makes for a better like horror film versus like fantasy, I guess. Are there really much in the way? I would totally go in on like a fantasy horror film. That
I
might be kind
know
of
a movie
interesting.
came out this year called The Green Knight, which I think,
Yeah, that is exactly what I was thinking about.
yeah, sort of that. I haven't seen it yet, but I think it has sort of a similar. It has like a vibe of a horror film, but it's a fantasy movie, and it's actually based off a old Celt myth, about the
Hmm.
Green Sir Gawain and the Green Knight,
Yeah.
which I had to read during college. So I am interested in seeing it and seeing
Oh,
what
that's
they
cool.
they build off of that.
Mhm.
But I get what you're saying, and I almost think that like horror was fantasy for like most of the '80s. I mean, look at like freaking Nightmare on Elm Street and like Friday the 13th and
Sure.
Evil Dead zombie movies. Well, I guess zombies are almost in George Romero's world, they were kind of more of a fantasy concept than like a truly science fiction concept, I think. But
Sure.
or even like Halloween. Like these are movies that are based on like some sort of level of occultism and fantasy and
Right.
the paranormal. But those characters grew into a so they were completely fantasy. Like there wasn't anything in there that I would terrify me. But I guess when you look at like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that there was no paranormal aspect of that movie.
Right. That was just like, see, that's the thing. I feel like fantasy is kind of a hard thing to weave into or horror tale, or harder nowadays, maybe. Because,
Well, I want to say too that before we move on, I just want to point this out that Peter Jackson started off directing horror films, and you can definitely see that influence on the Lord of the Rings trilogy that he
for
made.
sure. Which by actually that's a fantastic example of that because yeah, like the ring rates are like to me as a kid were terrifying.
Yeah, I thought they were freaky too.
I couldn't make my way through the first Fellowship of the Ring video game for the exact reason that the ring rates just scared me that badly. Like I just
Yeah,
couldn't fucking do it. It was too much.
yeah. There's something to be said why I think Fellowship is my favorite of those movies, just because the beginning of that film was so down to earth in a lot of ways. Like there was this palpable sense of fear when like Gandalf found out about that ring being where it was. Like as a
Right.
kid, I'm like, oh shit.
Well, they introduced this character of Gandalf, who's such a like yeah, like you said, like kind of down to earth guy. He like enjoys like he's entertaining to everyone, and like he likes do little fireworks and tricks for the kids. Like he's this very like grandpa-esque figure, and then like the moment the ring gets introduced, Gandalf's whole demeanor takes this huge turn where he's intently needing to find out what he needs to know to like make sure that things aren't as bad as he thinks they are, and they
Yeah.
are of course, and so just like makes that character way less wholesome in a hurry. And
I think
oh,
Peter Jackson also does like a great job of setting up the hobbits as being pretty innocent little fellas. So the
mhm.
thought of these like terrifying creatures descending upon like poor Samwise Gamgee just is like a
Right.
terrifying or like Pippin and Mary. They seem like such like bumbling like fools that are just like really endearing that you don't want
Mhm.
anything to happen to them. You know?
Creatures that are pure of heart and that like wouldn't assume that something's going to kill them right off the bat, but with intent would know like, oh, I'm going to die. And then like that's about as far as it would go.
Yeah.
Oh, but we're
Which
down
I
to
mean,
our
originally the Hobbit sequels were going to be by Guillermo del Toro, which would have been a fascinating to see how that played out. But anyway,
that depresses me in hearing that. That would have been
yeah.
so good. I love Guillermo del Toro. He's probably my favorite director, honestly. Just that his use of practical effects is something that is it certainly is a bit of a dying breed in terms of film.
Well, if we're gonna go to my number one right now, I think you'll
Mhm.
appreciate what my number one's gonna be.
Oh, Hellboy, yeah.
Nope. If we're talking about practical effects, I don't think it's done any better than this film. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, and that's going to be The Thing. I love this movie.
Oh
We're talking
yeah.
about sci-fi and horror getting mixed together, and just sort of like this sense of dread and not no one being able to help you, and stranded, and this creature that's just freaking terrifying. It's just an amazing film, and like I've watched it again this year. I think I've probably seen this movie. I don't know how many times at this point, like a lot though. I remember the first time I watched it, I was like, "Holy fuck! Look at that dog!" Oh,
Yeah, I feel like the dog in particular is something that really like puts people over the edge in terms of how fucked up this movie is, like right off the bat.
well, then like when the guy he suffers a heart attack, and they're using like the I can't remember what they're called, the things on his chest to try and get his heart going again.
Oh,
You know what I'm saying?
defibrillator.
Probably, yeah. And then the guy like explodes basically, and his head's like, and then like it turns into a spider on the ground. And that scene is followed immediately by Kurt Russell tying up the cast and doing the blood test, which is just an iconic scene and just so awesome. And has one of the best lines of any horror movie ever. It's like it's something to the effect of I understand what you guys have been through over the course of the night. I know it's been really bad, but when you have a moment, will you please get me the fuck out of this chair? It's like I love that line. Like I love the ending of it. I love how it's ambiguous. I love and I it's so weird. I just watched it again not too long ago, and I did not realize that the opening scene basically spelled out the entire movie. When Kurt Russell was playing that game of, I believe it was chess, on his computer, and like he knew he was gonna lose, so he just like took up his coffee and threw it against the computer, and the computer like explodes and like sparks, you know. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, so that's basically the film was like a game of chess, and at the end, he just decides to blow up the chessboard. That's what he did, and it's that movie rewards rewatching. The practical effects are amazing. Highly recommend. I know some people don't like that film. I don't know why, but I love it. So, The Thing, number one.
I mean, that is a really good pick for your number one. Like, it's very iconic, and that was another one of those movies that like did they use claymation in that film? Like,
They may have at the very end when they reveal the monster through the floorboards, but for the most part, no, they didn't really use claymation too much. It was mostly all just like practical effects, I think.
yeah, and like, and I don't know. I would argue that like claymation is a practical effect. It's very differently presented practical effect.
Yeah, I don't know the distinction. Yeah.
But actually, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. That would be a whole discussion.
So then I'm like, oh well, CGI practical effect then too. But yeah.
Yeah. But okay, so The Thing is your number one pick, which I would agree that is a very good number one pick for that. For me, my number one pick is a movie that I think we did actually watch for the first time together. And I was kind of surprised it didn't appear on your top five at all.
I may have just forgot.
Because it's based off of a Stephen King property. The Mist.
I thought of it. I thought of it. Yeah.
That is a movie that like has stuck with me for a long time, and I remember after I saw it for the first time,
we did watch it together for the first time. I remember that.
Which like after I saw the film with you for the first time, I was insistent on introducing this movie to literally everyone I knew. Like I had to make people watch this movie. And those same viewing parties I told you about, like horror movie parties in October, I suggested we watch The Mist. And so I got to watch a group of like 8 people all witness this moment of like just not only the whole movie by itself, but like the ending of that movie is what really kills most people. And they were all so upset with me for having brought this movie into their knowledge. And I could not have been more delighted. I was just like, this is the best. Like, it just is it's based off a Stephen King movie. It has
Thomas Jane.
Thomas Jane, thank you. Yeah, Thomas Jane, whom I've been seeing a lot from The Expanse.
Yeah.
But yeah, Thomas Jane is a painter in a small town. There's a military base nearby. He's married. He has a. Does he have a child in that movie?
He does. Yeah,
he does. Yeah.
Little
And,
boy.
Yep. But a big storm happens one night, and then the following day, there's like a lot of activity happening at the military base. And then as Thomas Jane and his child in the movie are shopping in the grocery store, the local grocery store, a mist moves in upon the city very, very quickly. It comes across the water of the nearby lake and engulfs the entire town. And anyone who ventures into the mist is inevitably just disappears. And we start learning later in the movie that there are creatures in the mist, things that we don't understand, fantastic creatures.
Yeah. And it really is like a science fiction movie in a lot of ways too, just because the mist is the military base was doing some sort of experimentations which caused this opening within to another universe, essentially another like parallel world, and then these creatures
like a parallel world, and like these things came through, and like
it's very Lovecraftian too. It's a very Lovecraft film.
It is, yeah, like very Lovecraftian, and it really it definitely hits the nail on the head a little bit in terms of like, not only are there monsters in the mist, but there are monsters in the grocery store. Like the people, there's a large group of people that are trapped in this grocery store from the start, and their factions begin forming, and like there are internal conflicts happening. It's very Walking Dead, in that who are the real monsters, zombies or the people? And like the Mist does a great job of introducing that very, very quickly. It's like things, you take away people's comforts and immediately they turn back into cavemen.
I mean, it's similar to The Thing in that way too. So
yeah, and it's a movie that stuck with me for a very long time. I really enjoy Thomas Jane as an actor, and I think he's I don't necessarily think he's a fantastic actor, but if he has the right people around him, he can really be a strong standout.
The best I've ever seen him was in Boogie Nights.
Boogie Nights. See, I think of his.
That was a movie that actually made me like Don Cheadle. I didn't really like Don Cheadle for a long time, but I liked him in that movie.
I don't know. My first exposure to Thomas Jane was actually him as the Punisher.
I think that's true for a lot of people.
And not a good movie necessarily. I think his presentation as the Punisher is pretty good. I just don't think it was a very good movie. But
another interesting thing about The Mist is that a lot of the actors from it actually ended up being on The Walking Dead. And the reason why is because Frank Darabont, that directed The Mist, and he also directed The Green Mile.
Oh, sure.
And did he direct Shawshank Redemption? Ooh, man. He's known for adapting Stephen King novels and novellas. I guess.
Let's see.
But Frank Darabont directed the first season of The Walking Dead. So a lot of the actors that show up on.
He did direct The Shawshank Redemption.
Okay, that's good to know. Which is considered one of the best movies of all time, obviously. But also based off a Stephen King novella from, I think, Different Seasons. Yeah, that Different Seasons, not a little. It's like a collection of 4 novellas by Stephen King. They also, I won't get into it, but it's led to a lot of really interesting movies. The Mist is actually a novella by Stephen King as well, which had a different ending than the movie. Frank Darabont came up with the ending to the movie.
Yeah. Well, and there was a television show for The Mist too.
And I have not seen it. Yeah, I haven't seen it. I heard it's not very good.
No, I watched a little bit, and I can confirm that it didn't strike me as very interesting right away.
It's such a cool idea though for like a show or a movie too.
It is, yeah. Like, and that's part of the reason why it's my number one. Like, I would say that there are movies I've mentioned or even that we've talked about already that I think are better movies just
Yeah.
overall.
Well, I wouldn't even
But,
like in a way. I don't know if I would consider Pan's Labyrinth a horror film. There's definitely horrific elements in it,
mhm,
but I'm not sure if I would consider it a horror film. But definitely freaks. There's some. It's really freaky. I don't know the distinction between horror sometimes, but in my mind,
yeah,
horror at the end of the day, it's about isolation. Like
mhm,
these films can only happen if the characters are isolated in some way. I don't know if that
true,
says something about just humanity in general, that like a horrific situation is when you can't get help from someone, like you
right,
can't come together as a group and actually accomplish the task at hand.
sure,
Um, and it is just kind of interesting to me that that is any horror movie has to somehow isolate the main character or a group of characters for it
sure.
to be a horror film. And I think in a way, Pan's Labyrinth is more of a drama because there's not that it doesn't focus on that isolating element, if that makes sense.
No, I think that's fair. I mean, like, it doesn't necessarily focus on the isolating elements. Yeah, I think it's mostly the presentation of her trials, more or
Yeah.
less. As
Don't get me
she,
wrong, that movie's plenty horrific, but
oh yeah, no, and I really, it's a movie that I've been meaning to rewatch again, specifically watching with my wife because I think it's a movie that she would enjoy, despite the kind of scary nature of it. But but yeah, like I think we've mentioned a lot of really good movies on these
yeah.
lists. I know
Well,
I've noted a couple of honorable mentions on
and
my end.
there is an honorable mention I do want to say just because I watched it recently, and it's not really it's not a movie, but it's by a director that's really directed a lot of really good movies. And I'm drawing a blank on his name right now for some reason. Shoot. Anyway, it's a show on Netflix, and I mentioned it before on the podcast called Midnight Mass. And I just found the
Midnight
show
Mass, right?
it very like it affected me for days afterwards. Because really it's just like a long meditation on death,
Mhm.
really, is what it is. It's really well done. Like it's the ending of it, and I'm not gonna give it away. It just put me in a mood where I'm like, it's incredibly a depressing ending, but also on another level, just incredibly uplifting. Like I remember driving around afterwards, I'm like, I wanted to cry just because I'm like, I kind of understand. Like life just is so short, and we're all gonna die, and like it's almost beautiful that we're all gonna die. And I was
Mhm.
almost like comfortable with that thought. And I was just like looking around at like random people. I'm like, it's just amazing that this person is even here right now. So I would recommend this show. It's
Hmm.
really well done. There's a lot of monologuing, which is kind of you'll pick up on it pretty quickly, especially by the middle of the season. You're kind of like, why everyone is just like really an excellent monologuer. But
Like everyone's got a really well
yeah,
put together
it
inner
feels like a
monologue.
Stephen King show. Like
Mhm.
it feels like if I say what it feels like, it's gonna give what the show's away, what it's about. So I'm not gonna say what it Stephen King novel it feels like, but
Interesting. Okay.
it's a it's a great show. I'll say that. Some people might
Interesting.
not like it,
No,
but
I have noted it. I've been keeping a list of all of the movies and shows you've suggested. So
well, if you watch these films or shows, oh, you know what I also didn't do? I still have the purple filter on my lips, I think. Um,
and I am not seeing anything on my end, I
okay,
don't think. I think you're okay.
okay, good. Anyway, yeah,
I had several honorable mentions. One of which is not a good movie, but something that I would just suggest watching. In the case that you don't like, now how am I forgetting her name? Paris Hilton. There you go. If you're
House of
not
Wax.
a House of Wax, yeah, House of Wax, not necessarily a very good horror movie. I let me okay. Out of morbid curiosity, House of Wax.
Well, like I was saying, there's just so many good horror films, and I almost hate to like just pick out five, but
Right.
these are ones that
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to say. There's like you mentioned the Fourth Kind, like I really love, like I actually really do like Sightings quite a bit. And The Sixth
Dude,
Sense is
You
Great film.
really need to see The Fourth Kind. Like, I
Yeah.
really, really think you need to watch that.
There's
For
another one called Fire in the Sky, I believe, that I have not seen, but
Fire in the Sky.
I
Okay.
believe it's another horror film based on getting abducted by aliens. It's apparently just like really, really intense. Yeah, Fire in the Sky.
And then yeah, so House of Wax is kind of my like that's just a movie that I remember clearly because I remember watching it with a buddy years ago. I was definitely like middle school, I think, when that movie came out. Um, yeah, it came out in 2005. So yeah, that would have been my like eighth grade. Um, but yeah, like it's a terrible movie. It has a 27% on Rotten Tomatoes. Like
Yeah.
not a good movie, but like I think it's got a gruesome enough set of scenes that like maybe makes it worth watching, especially if you don't like Paris Hilton. I'm going to repeat that like Paris Hilton gets murdered in this movie. So
I also someone else I kind of wanted to point out. If you like the idea of science fiction horror, and this guy has been really he's behind a lot of the things that have come out in the past few years that have been science fiction horror that I thought were really excellent. His name is Alex Garland. He directed Annihilation, which was another one I thought was a really good film that came out in the past few years. He directed Ex Machina, which I thought was a
oh,
really good film. I know we watched that together, or recently we watched it at the same time, around the
we
same
did.
time. He also wrote 28 Days Later
You know,
and
actually,
Sunshine. Yeah,
that's funny because yeah, I put that on my honorable mentions list.
yeah.
Was 28 Days Later.
And he also directed a show called Debs that came out on Hulu. I think it was like FX on Hulu, but it's a
Mhm.
pretty slow moving show, but I thought it was incredibly profound. It's about like the existence of God and just this idea of the Silicon Valley creating a computer so powerful that it could basically, from one little piece of data, it can calculate an entire universe, our entire universe. It can see all the way back into the past as far as you want to go. You can see Jesus dying on the cross, or you can go into the future just because of the data it can process. And so, like
Interesting.
one point, it can extrapolate the entire universe, and just the power that gives to a person and how it like is basically God, and it's amazing. It's a really interesting show.
Like the
So
sounds of that. I mean, I'm looking at the cast. I'm seeing that Nick Offerman's in that.
yeah, it's
It's like
he plays a dramatic role. I don't know how much I really liked him in that role, but it's definitely um it's definitely not something I've seen him in before.
yeah. I mean, I love his catalog because I'm looking at Ex Machina. Yeah, like you mentioned, Annihilation, 28 Days Later, Dread, the 2012 Dread film. Like, I don't think he necessarily directed that film. No, he didn't, but he was involved. He helped produce that film.
Oh yeah, he I guess he helped write it. I see that.
Mhm.
He also Never Let Me Go. He obviously didn't write that book, but I thought that was a pretty good film as well. He didn't direct it. That's a pretty horrific. See, I think in a way, and we don't have to spend too much because we're running out of time here, but I do really think horror. What makes horror unique is that it does focus on the isolation. But you look like at a movie like Ex Machina, which is a movie about isolation, right? Like
Sure.
they're isolated in this billionaire Mark Zuckerberg like techies like pad, and then I think in somewhere in the mountains or Alaska or something. I don't know, but it's that movie is more about ideas than it is about the isolation, which I think is a really interesting distinction between like a sci-fi horror. Like I
Sure.
would almost say like Alien is a horror film more than it is a science fiction because of that
Sure.
focus on isolation. And Ex Machina is a film. It is as more of a science fiction because it focuses more on the ideas rather than like the isolation of it.
I can see that. Yeah, because like you definitely the whole premise of Ex Machina is the advancement of technology. Like that's a very prime. It's the entire point of the film. Whereas like Alien is they are where they are. It's just the setting, and it's more about like humanity like being cut off from one another. that like really creates the issue that is
Totally.
the driving force of the movie. So that I could definitely see why that you see that distinction. Also, really fascinated that the like one of the was it like this Halo film had Alex Garland.
Yeah, he's an interesting dude. So he actually started out, as far as I understand, as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
So he wrote some, like he wrote The Beach, which there was obviously a Leo DiCaprio movie that came out about that, which is a weird movie. And then he ended up like writing movies, and then now he became a director,
Sure.
and a pretty good director too. Like I'm definitely will be interested in whatever he produces next.
Yeah. Well, and Annihilation, I've seen that movie, and then I watched that with my wife, but she's also read the book.
Right.
Um,
Which I heard are really good. I haven't read them, but I've heard good things.
I mean, I found the film supremely disturbing in a lot of ways.
I think that movie really, it's just, it's been a long time since I watched it, but it really focuses on cancer, right? And like how whatever this thing that's growing there is like making nature cancerous and like warping animals
Yeah.
and like, yeah.
Well, like it really, like the radiation that's coming from that place is causing cancer, but like it's like cancer not necessarily in the way that we understand it. I think for me, like a big thing that really disturbed me is like knowing the radiation aspect. Like after having watched a series like Chernobyl.
See, that was what I was gonna say.
Yeah,
Honorable
like
mention of freaking Chernobyl. That movie was like
that
the most
so
horrific thing I've
good.
ever seen.
Like that series was just so good. And again, like it's horrifying, but it's not horror. It's a historical piece with some drama sprinkled in. But like those events happened. Like some of the characters like don't exist as they are, but regardless, like the damage that it caused and the effects it had on the human body, that's all real.
Yeah.
Like
there's some scenes in that series that are just like stuck in my head. Just like that one scientist who they've made go and look at like the open reactor. And he's just like staring at it and his face is reddening. And I'm like, oh crap. Or when that one guy, he's like, no, it's fine. Like the guy who was ahead of it, and then he just like barfs. I'm like, okay. Yeah.
Just so like, oh man. I like, and that's something about Annihilation that really freaks me out, because like there's a lot of talk about radiation, right? So like, I mean, I guess brief spoiler warning if you haven't seen Annihilation. There's a moment where like Natalie Portman, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's having this very, very close and intimate encounter with a being at the end of this movie. And it is like, in knowing like what it and its radiation is doing to the environment around it, it just like her touching it at all is just something that like just gives me the fucking heebie-jeebies. I'm like thinking, I'm just like, this thing's like a walking Chernobyl reactor, and she's just pressing up against it, like not of her own will. It's fucking horrifying. Like,
to me, that pig bear monster thing that was mimicking her friend's like dying scream.
Yes,
that was
so
terrifying.
Like such a good, oh man, like that was a movie that I thought did monsters really well, because like the creatures you run into in that are like fantastical in a way, but not in a way that's completely unbelievable. If given enough push from the like mad scientist end of science, you kind of see how those things could happen. And Chernobyl, what a fucking good show. I've been thinking about rewatching that too.
I don't know, man. That's like another one. I'm like, maybe I'll. I don't know if I want to watch it again. It's just so intense, and like that legitimately freaks me out. I remember because I watched that. It was like a month before COVID.
Oh god.
And that movie really like influenced what I thought, COVID was. I'm like, okay, maybe it was leaked from China, and they just like made They just made a terrible
Made a
error.
cover-up story. Yeah.
And like, yeah, no, I mean, it makes sense, right? Like, it was another communist country, uh, and it started where like that lab was in their marketplace and stuff. And I'm like, okay, like I still kind of have a feeling that it was just like leaked, and then people were, and they were like, oh crap, what just happened? We're just gonna not say anything. It's just gonna go, and like it's fine. Like, we're just whatever. Which is
Right.
totally their MO too, you know. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that that's what happened.
Yeah, I
I don't
mean,
think it was like a nefarious thing where they're like, we're gonna release this thing and cause like a worldwide crash and a bunch of people to die. I just would think it was like human error, you know, like oops.
yeah. Well, I mean, like the wet markets in China in particular have been a place where like superbugs have manifested themselves before, and it stands to reason why people would be concerned that that was the case, right? And like however that may or may not have happened with COVID is just one of those things where you're like, yeah, Chernobyl, if anything, like
Probably never know.
proves,
We'll probably
yeah,
never
no,
know.
like Chernobyl is one of those shows that like really puts a big spotlight on how like a government, a big powerful government in a country that like doesn't give a fuck, is more concerned about the machismo of their, you know, their image than they are about the consequences of their actions. And like I don't think it's too inappropriate to say that like China definitely falls within that category. Like that is a country that like categorically has repressed its people in a way that is like is completely against what should be the correct way to do business. And like, yeah, just like you never know, because you're right. Like if that were to be the case, we would never know. But whether that's true or not, we have no idea. But
You
it
don't
it
know. You
it
don't know.
falls into that horror movie category. um but yeah, I had one more honorable mention, only in that
Nice.
we were talking about it briefly before the podcast, was Train to Busan. um like I've been, my wife is fascinated with Korean culture. She's been to South Korea, and like and very much is into K-pop, and we've been getting more into she used to watch a lot of like Korean dramas that were kind of like more, I mean, I guess gauged more at like, you know, teenage girls more or less based on the subject matter, but things that she's really enjoyed and that like a lot of her coworkers do. And as a result, that's kind of what led us, and also based just on like pure demand from all of our friends and family about Squid Game, you know.
Which
Um,
is horror. I would
yeah,
characterize
like
it
I
as
would think that
horror.
like
It's
it
like it's like a mix between horror and like a thriller maybe, but it's yeah,
yeah,
kind of
like
like
I think it,
Parasite, which is also
yeah,
South Korean, but
yeah, like it rides that line between like it's certainly not a situation anyone would want to find themselves in, right? So like you in watching that series, it reminds me of Train to Busan, which is a zombie movie, but it's set on a train in South Korea. Has to deal with a father trying to get him and his daughter to safety um, after a zombie outbreak begins outside of the train, but as a result of one passenger ends up on the train, and like just
yeah.
all of the mayhem takes place from there.
It
um
reminds me of like a, which bring up Parasite, but Snowpiercer, which I would also say is kind of horrific and a
yeah,
really good film.
yeah, the train Snowpiercer is horrific in a way that's is a little too relatable, um like in
There's a lot of
comparison.
stuff coming out of South Korea that's very like focused on class and capitalism and the results of that. I find really interesting.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's been protests as a result of, you know, like Squid Game having been released, and that it hit a little too close to home for some people. And I think that is the case. I know that it makes me feel uncomfortable. I'm thinking,
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
the other one too, I was gonna give an honorable mention to that just came out in the past few years. That's not truly a horror film. Oh crap! There's another one I should have brought up. We could go on forever.
I
But I was gonna say
know.
another one that should definitely be in my top five and deserves to be in the top five is Silence of the Lambs. A great film.
Oh, fantastic movie.
But I was also going to mention The Joker, which again isn't really a horror film, but I found horrific and left me in a certain state afterwards. I'd also give a shout out to Midsummer. I did think that was a good film. Really disturbing. And I'm a Stephen King junkie in general. I don't know if I really. I mean, The Shining it's just a great film. It's almost you don't even need to say it, but Stanley Kubrick in general is just he feels all of his movies to me that I've seen kind of feel like a horror film, even if they're not.
Right.
I'm just like trying to think like what else has come out in the past years. I could go on forever. So anyway, I'll probably leave it at that unless you have any follow-up things to say.
No, I think that's a pretty comprehensive, because I mean, like, you know, we had talked about doing a spooky episode of the podcast. It was something that like maybe we could have prepared for better, but even in just coming up with a list of 5, we ended up talking about 20 movies, right? Like, and so it's one of those things that like I know I'm a fan of the genre, because I don't know, like, yeah, even in talking about some TV shows, you know, I think of Love, Death, Robots has a lot of like horror themed episodes, in the same way that like Black Mirror is. You know, these notions of like, we're just trying to make life better for everyone, and then like one miscalculation is all it takes for it to go completely off the rails.
There is a ton, like, that's why horror is one of my favorite genres ever, because a lot of the things that I've loved the most in my life, like TV programs, have been sort of horror adjacent, at least. Like, definitely, like, I would even say Lost definitely has some horror elements in it, which I don't see gets brought up too often. But yeah, it's just great. I love it.
Yeah, it's fantastic genre, and clearly we're fans. Yeah, we should talk more about horror movies in the future.
Yeah,
fuck it, we'll do a spooky November too. Why not?
Spooky November, Spookember for
Spookember. But with that, I believe we have reached the end of this episode of the Nerds of the North podcast. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. This was a fun episode, getting to talk about some of our favorite movies and do a little bit of a ranking in terms of some lists. If you guys are interested in more rankings lists in terms of other genres of movies that Nick and I have perhaps watched or participated in, or would be interested in hearing us discuss, please let us know down in the comments down below. But yeah, otherwise, thank you all for watching today, this spooktacular episode of the podcast. And we hope you all have a fun and safe Halloween. Stay safe out there. You know, like with the pandemic going on, just stay safe. Whatever way you think you can keep yourself safe best, you do that. And have a safe holiday. Enjoy some candy and pumpkin spice, all the things. So with that being said, Nick, you have any passing or closing remarks?
No, just like you said, everyone have an extremely happy Halloween. I'm sad that it's all going to be over in just a few days' time. This is my favorite time of year. So
it's a great time of year. October is one of the best months of the year, in my opinion. We should have 2 months.
I think it is the best month of the year, personally, but
hot take out here.
Hot take. Yep, that's gonna get this brigaded. This whole video. What did he just say about it?
What did you say about October?
How dare he? Clearly, April is the best month.
Clearly.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Yeah. Have a good night, everybody. Goodbye.